Hi everybody, it's Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au. Last night I was speaking about one of the great myths of residential real estate, which says that you should always buy in the capital cities because they always show much better capital growth than the regional markets do. And I sought to debunk that myth in part by referring to the example of Newcastle. And Newcastle in the last couple of years, there's been extensive price growth, particularly in the last 12 months. And I illustrated the point by detailing some of the growth that's happened in the Newcastle market. Most suburbs have had double-digit growth in their median prices in the last 12 months, and 7 or 8 that I mentioned have had growth above 20% and a couple above 30%. Very, very strong growth in anybody's measures. So I thought I'd refer to a couple of others that are doing almost as well. The first of them is the Sunshine Coast market in Queensland. Most suburbs in the Sunshine Coast is a very extensive region, quite a big regional city now, and most of the suburbs throughout the Sunshine Coast have had median price growth in double digits, but many have been 15, 16, 19, up to 21%. Boccarina's up 15%, Caloundra's up 16%. Woombye in the hinterland is up 14%, and the strength of the market there are so great that even Noosa Heads is showing really strong growth. I've always, for the last many years, I've regarded Noosa as one of the great lemons of Australian real estate because it had this big reputation, but for most of the past 10 years it's delivered nothing in the way of price growth. In fact, until very recently, the median price for an apartment at Noosa Head was lower than it was 10 years earlier, so negative growth over a decade. But such is the strength of the Sunshine Coast economy that it's spread to Noosa, and Noosa Head house median price is up 90%, and nearby Sunshine Beach is up 21%. Why is it happening? Well, the Sunshine Coast is very much an economy in transition. It's been, until recently, a tourist resort, and real estate markets that are based on tourism economies seldom show strong, sustainable growth, but much has changed in the Sunshine Coast. There's over $20 billion being spent on infrastructure and property development in that market, and it's created new industries, particularly the medical precinct, which has created a whole new industry on the Sunshine Coast. There's a lot more happening besides the big Maroochydore CBD development, the earthworks, the civil construction works are well underway there. And that's a project that's going to extend over 10 or 20 years, spending many billions of dollars on commercial, hotel, convention centre, retail and residential components on the site of what used to be a golf course near central Maroochydore. The $2 billion university hospital has been the catalyst for a lot of things, but there's also $1 billion being spent on the Bruce Highway in the Sunshine Coast region, and a big expansion soon to begin for the Sunshine Coast Airport. So a lot happening there, and that's precipitated a growth property market. Another case in point is Geelong in Victoria, just outside the Melbourne metropolitan area, and it's probably right now the strongest residential property market in Victoria. I would suggest that Melbourne, although the growth figures coming out of Melbourne for prices are still very strong, I think sales activity is well past its peak in Melbourne, and next year we're going to see those sales price growth rates coming down in Melbourne. But in Geelong's going gangbusters, and many of the suburbs there, pretty much all of them in the city of Greater Geelong, have had double-digit growth in their median prices in the last 12 months, including Barwon Head, which is up 18%, Belmont's up 16%, Drysdale 14%, and Dented Head 22%, and many other examples, and a broad range of price ranges there, some down-market suburbs, middle-range suburbs, and up-market suburbs, all showing very strong growth. And it's interesting because doom and gloom was predicted for the Geelong economy, primarily because of some major business closures, headed by the closure of the Ford motor plant about 12 months ago. But what media didn't appreciate or didn't really care about in its tendency to focus on negatives is that the jobs being created in new ventures in the city of Greater Geelong outnumbered the jobs being lost and closures like the Ford motor plant by a factor of about 12 to 1, according to our research. So it's very much a growth economy, a very strong economy, very strong links, both transport and otherwise, to central Melbourne, much more affordable than housing in central Melbourne. So people can conceivably buy an affordable property down in Geelong and commute to a job somewhere in the Melbourne metropolitan area, but they don't need to because there's plenty of jobs in the city of Greater Geelong itself. So that's another very, very strong market. Now, what do the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Geelong and Victoria, and Newcastle that I mentioned last night in New South Wales have in common? Well, they all have growing populations. They all have very strong, diverse local economies. And remember, in real estate, it's always about the local economy, not so much about national economic factors like interest rates. And they also have in common very, very big spending on new infrastructure. And that's the big kicker very often in real estate. The markets that grow the most are the ones where infrastructure is good and there's big spending on new infrastructure, creating economic activity and jobs. And the other thing Newcastle, Geelong, Sunshine Coast have in common is relative affordability, particularly relative to their capital cities. I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about the regional markets in 2018. Up until this point, over the last 3 or 4 years, it's been very much a Sydney story, and then more recently, Melbourne's become part of the story. But I think in 2018, we're going to be hearing about some of the smaller capital cities, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about regional markets like Newcastle, like the Sunshine Coast, like Geelong, where already we've seen exceptional price growth, debunking that myth that the regional centres can't compete with the capital cities on price growth. Terry Ryder from Hotspotting. Bye for now.